What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's actual return to live broadcasts here for Lumix Live. We obviously, if you haven't watched it already, check out our recap from NAB that we posted last week. Super fun show. Really excited to actually get out there and actually be back with a bunch of other creators and just seeing the industry get kind of back into going to these shows to get hands on and be able to speak to us in person. So if you were at the show and you swung by the booth, it was awesome to meet you. We will be, before we go too far into the rest of the topics, like I said, this is a general AMA stream, so we're going to be kind of a little all over the place. Just want to remind everybody that we will be at Cinegear in LA this year. That show is actually happening at the Paramount Studios lot. So be sure to keep tabs. We'll be announcing where our booth is and all that kind of information, hopefully very shortly, because that show is a little over a month away. So yeah, that's going to be another opportunity if you're out in the LA area and you're planning to want to go to one of those shows. That is a really awesome show to go to. So yeah, we'll be there showing off some cool stuff. So definitely be on the lookout. Yeah, so with these broadcasts, you can tell I'm a little rusty getting back into the live conversations. This is our weekly broadcast that we try to do, kind of every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. We try to do them live as much as we can. When we're out traveling, we'll be trying to record something and get it out to you, whether that's prior to the event or like last week during it at the event. So yeah, and the whole purpose is for you to be able to ask us questions, troubleshoot things that maybe you're having an issue with, or just want to kind of understand the products a little bit more. We've talked very heavily recently about, S5 Mark II, S5 Mark II X, the full frame line of cameras, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to have any conversations about the G series products, GH6 and so on. So throughout this conversation, feel free to just ask any question you want. I will be able to try to, I will answer as many of them as I can. Obviously, there are some things that I cannot answer or don't have the bandwidth to answer at the moment. So, we'll try to do that and just kind of get you some more information. I will caveat very early on that there are people asking about this supposed S1H series update. I don't know what you're talking about. I did see one rumor online, but as I remind everybody, anybody can make up a rumor, especially those that legitimately have no inside knowledge or no kind of access to any conversations with us. So if it's rumor based or stuff like that, I won't be addressing those questions. So if that's what your question is, sorry. Yeah, there just is nothing there to share. But yeah, other than that, if you have a question, tag at Lumix USA or Lumix Cameras. Both of them should work. And then this way I can at least see it, get it through the chat a little bit easier. But yeah, so outside of that, just a reminder, Lumix Pro Services, we have the Red and Platinum tier here in the US. If you purchase the Lumix camera, make sure to at least get yourself on Red. It's free. Follow the QR code on the screen or the link down in the description. If you're looking to get a little bit higher end product or a higher end service, take a look at the Platinum level. That's getting you higher level services there. So 20% off out of warranty repairs, next day shipping both ways for any repairs that do come in. You get annual sensor cleanings, all that kind of fun stuff. So if you are someone who really likes having that extra level of protection, at least here in the US, be sure to take a look at the links below. Get yourself registered. Yeah, so let's kind of go through, let's see what kind of questions we've got here. How much longer must I wait for the first Lumix G with PDAF? Well, just like we've said at NAB and our director Yamane has stated, it is obviously the next area where, you may see the PDAF technology kind of move down into the Micro Four Thirds platform. As far as dates, times, what product line, that kind of stuff, there is no information that I have that I can share. So unfortunately, it's kind of just keep your ear to the ground. Keep following us here on Lumix Live, because you know that as soon as we get any kind of information like that, we're gonna be talking about it on the stream. But yeah, at this point, know that with the launch of the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II X, this is the new phase for us. Pardon the pun there, but this is a new chapter for the brand. So just kind of hang tight. Know that we are just as equally committed to the Micro Four Thirds platform as we are to the S Series platform. I know for some it seems like all the air is being sucked out of the room by the S Series, but that is the new product. So that's usually how a lot of this kind of stuff goes. When the new product's out, that's what most people are asking questions about, and mostly what we're talking about. But when we get to the point where G Series is due for an update, obviously we're going to be talking about it, and we'll be talking about it in force. So hopefully that at least gets you a little bit of information there. I know it's not that definitive. So let's see here. Does Lumix plan to launch firmware update program for focusing and subject tracking? Yeah. If you followed the Lumix products and our history of firmware updating and what some people call Kaizen, there are always things that we are working on behind the scenes to add into firmware updates, whether that is suggestions that come from all of you, so users in the field, whether it's things that we determine and find internally while we're actually kind of getting more of the feedback from people actually using the cameras outside of the internal testing teams. We're always working to improve the performance. I think what a lot of a lot that kind of gets maybe a little overlooked with specifically the S5 Mark II and Mark II X. This is our first attempt at phase detect in a hybrid camera. So I would personally say, that as a first shot, I think it's pretty damn good. But there is always room for improvement. I don't think anyone would ever expect that right out of the gate you're going to be perfect. So definitely stay tuned. Make sure you're following us on all the channels where we make announcements and stuff regarding firmware updates. And yeah, just kind of keep your ear out. There are always improvements that we're working to make on, and it takes the feedback that y'all give for us to make those. And a little segue before we go into too many other questions actually is relating about firmware update and an improvement specifically that in my testing with it and my use cases of the S5 Mark II has actually proven to be a very substantial speed up for photographers when you're using the camera for photography with autofocus and the way the system works. So I've got my S5 Mark II hooked up here, and if you have been following, we did just release a firmware update back on March 28th that added some refinement for the way the system works prior to when you start capturing a burst and the kind of preview and the standby modes. So that firmware update is version 1.1. So if I come down here, we'll show you where you find that. Right now, you'll see I'm on version 1.1. You'll find that under the settings menu. This is also where you update the newer cameras. So it's done through the firmware version menu. And what that firmware update added is the ability to adjust the AFC live view kind of performance. So in the existing system, when it first shipped out, everything is always done to be as high quality, as high resolution, as high burst rate as possible that you can get when it comes to looking through the viewfinder or using the rear screen. But what we found is that in some cases, users wanted it to be even faster. Think when you're firing flashes with the camera. If you want it to be ultra fast and just as snappy as our previous systems were, this is partially something that addresses that as well. But really for the burst photography shooters, this firmware update addressed the way the AFC system works while you're actually looking through before capturing a photo or capturing a video clip. So you have a new option here called AFC Live View. And you'll see by default now, it is set to speed priority after you update. And what this means is that it's going to prioritize the speed of the live view when the shutter button is pressed halfway. So it means that the system's going to be working faster than you may have seen before. So that reduces things like lag time between when you press the shutter and say a flash fires or when the burst starts shooting. It just generally speeds up the whole system. Then there's image priority. If you're someone who much more prefers having the sharpest, highest quality preview that you can get on the camera while you're doing, photography or half pressing the shutter for focus, you can switch it back to image priority. This has no effect on the actual image that you're capturing. This is just the way the standby system works. And what I've seen, at least from my capturing both the motorsports using the 30 frames per second burst mode on the camera, as well as doing some flash firing work with my Godox flash here, is that there is a marked improvement in the responsiveness of the camera overall. So that kind of goes back to that point of, like I was saying, is that we are always listening to improve and streamline the way the cameras work and the functionality of them. And a lot of this comes from the feedback that y'all give us into where to look. Where do you see and want some of these improvements? And if we can do them quickly, we'll try to do them quickly. But one thing to remember is that firmware updates are not as easy as some make it sound online. Just because in theory, speeding up the camera would sound easy to do, that's never the case. Firmware update has to be validated, checked against every single function that's in the camera to make sure that you don't break something else. If you look at trends of some cameras that have firmware updates, it's happened before. So, so feedback like that is what got us to the point where we now have at least version 1.1. And know that we're not done with firmware updates by any stretch of the imagination. We already know that RAW over HDMI is going to be coming to the S5 Mark II. So that'll be a firmware update, and then you'll have to get the SFU2 upgrade if you want to work with RAW over HDMI. But yeah, that would be the next thing on the horizon for updates. Let's see here. Going back to some of these questions. Does Lumix plan to... Okay, did that one. Where were we? All right. GH6 and others in video custom profiles. I can switch exposure mode, PAS and M. Profiles. This isn't possible. Would be nice if this could be added. So that's actually, there's a reason why that's not doable with the basic setup. Hopefully the stream didn't just drop there. Okay, it looks like we're good. So basically, the way custom profiles work is you are building a custom profile based on the settings that you have the camera set up to. So say you want to set aperture priority for photography. Well, you have to put the camera in aperture priority. The camera doesn't have kind of a creative photo mode like we do for video where you software select whether or not it's ASM or P. So that's why it doesn't do it, and it probably won't be able to be added because of the way our system works. That program, aperture, shutter, and manual are separate modes on the actual dial. It's not a software change. So it's a good idea, and it does work for video, as you've pointed out, but as far as photography goes, that's not going to be something that basically I think would be doable because of the way PAS and M works on most cameras. Let's see here. Really enjoyed and appreciate these lives you guys have been doing. They're helping me get used to the great use of the S5 Mark II. It's my first full frame camera. Well, that is awesome, Miles. Welcome. If you ever have any questions, feel free to drop them in there. And I see you do have another question, so we will get to that in a moment. Jay Cortez, does Lumix plan to provide a firmware update to fix laggy startup time? It usually only happens on the first start of the day. After that, it doesn't take long. Yes, I have the latest firmware out. So, startup time is tied actually to the way the system stages down different sleep modes. So when you turn a camera off, one of the things that we listened, and again, this is something that came specifically from the community, cameras, even when they're powered off, still have power draw. Because they have to keep the internal capacitors charged, which is what allows you to keep the internal clocks and your settings all charged, things like that. But also, if you're using things like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth to wake up, all of these other functions all still run in the background when you have the camera off because they need to be charged and ready to receive a signal. The reason the S5 Mark II takes a little bit longer on the first startup is because if the camera sits for a very long time, it goes into a very deep sleep mode. And this is specific in response to users saying that they wanted to be able to have the camera sit in storage or on a shelf for a longer period of time without having battery drain that you can see in some cameras out there. So while I'm not going to say that it's going to be changed as far as how that system works, we do take that feedback into consideration and working on say, okay, well, this is what we did in reaction and response to what we were being asked to do, so we did it. Now there are some users are saying maybe it's too long. All that information gets passed on to the engineers. Whether it's something that can be changed or will be changed, I have no idea. But you commenting in the chat is what helps us understand, okay, maybe, maybe in general, we'd want to see this, kind of shortened. Maybe you don't really care as much about, the how long you can leave a camera sitting on a shelf with a battery in it. That's all stuff that kind of has to, kind of work out and then determine what makes the best sense for all users, not just one case or two case. It has to be, global, what makes sense for all user feedback. Let's see here. Will it ever be possible to use APS-C mode with photo? Possible, probably. Whether or not you think, or whether or not it's gonna be implemented, I don't know. Mainly because of the reason that if you ever look at the way our RAW files work, when it comes to using aspect ratios, our RAW files are always the full sensor, no matter what you choose as far as aspect ratio or whatever. So in the photography side, even if we cropped it to APS-C, that would just be a flag for the RAW file in post, so that when you bring it in the Lightroom, it would be doing a crop in on it, instead of actually giving you a cropped APS-C photo. So is it technically possible? I mean, sure, it's technically possible. At the same time, I think it's a bit of a back and forth between different logics on how the images should be saved, right? If the camera has the ability to record full frame, full image area, and get you 24 megapixel, setting the camera to APS-C is the same as going into post and just action setting to just crop everything by 1.5 or 1.6, whatever your crop choice would be. I know that doesn't necessarily mean, that it would be great for all users, but again, that's that kind of fine line where which method makes the most sense for as many people as possible. Because if you start to go down certain designs where this only works for this group, but it doesn't do anything else for everybody else, that gets a little hard to kind of figure out, should it be there, or is it something that enough people are actually going to get benefit of? Current ways of doing it, honestly, you can go in, if you're shooting JPEGs, you can go into the camera, and I can probably show it on this one. You can go into the camera if you are just shooting JPEG imagery. You can change this to, let's see, I'll go to fine. We're at 24 megapixel, and then I can come in and turn on, if I remember where it is. I believe it's called EX Tele. Yes. So EX teleconverter. So teleconverter function is on. And then what you would do is come into the photo mode, go back into your picture size, and then as you change the resolution, so here's 12 megapixel, here's 6 megapixel, it will allow you to actually crop in. So 12 megapixel would be about an APS-C crop. Large would be the full sensor area. So you kind of can do it, but you're only going to get a JPEG when you do that. If I change the camera to RAW plus fine and then come in here and change it, you're going to get this, but the RAW file is still going to be the full image area, last I checked. So, but yeah, hopefully that kind of helps a little bit on the info for you. Let's see here. Whoop. Thank you, YouTube. What is the best setting for... Wait, here we go. Wait a minute. Where did we go? Let's see here. Oh, man. Thank you, YouTube, for just jumping the comments so far. Any info on S5 Mark II release date after seeing it at NEB? Oh, okay, Cliff. I think you mean S5 Mark II X. Soonish. Kind of just keep your ear to the ground. You'll know here and on our social as soon as it comes out. So shouldn't be too much longer. Steven says, any update on whether the SSD and internal cards will ever communicate to create backup recordings for some of the CF Express only shooting modes? That would be really handy. My understanding of the way that files are written to an SD card, NCF Express card versus SSD, the actual pipeline that the image has to go to for where it's stored means that you won't be able to do backup recording for internal SD or CF Express and SSD recording. It is one or the other. That being said, the external HDMI is still completely usable. So that means that if you do need to do backup recording and you're recording to SSD, you could just do it to an external recorder. And that would give you, at that point, if you're doing something like ProRes on, say, like an S5 Mark II X or on a GH6, you'd have dual ProRes recordings for your backup. But at the moment, I do not believe, from my understanding in conversations, that CF Express and external SSD support will be simultaneous because of the way the image pipeline is written between both. So here, what if an S5 Mark II X wants to record to SSD, power the camera, and use a gimbal like an RS3? How would you solve that? I presume USB hubs don't work. This is a good point. So currently, the way our power, well, let's chop this up in chunks. I'll start with power. So power is actually quite an easy one. That would be using something like a DCC-17 to replace the battery in the camera and run it to either something like DTAP or our formal AC-10 and DCC-17 adapter. There are plenty of solutions out there that allow you to do battery delete and power the camera. When it comes to, and that's what you would basically need to do while you're doing SSD recording. When it comes to being able to control something like an RS3 while you're using the USB-C port for SSD recording, unfortunately, that's just not going to be possible if you're doing the SSD recording at the time. I know DJI has some ability to do Bluetooth control for that, and that has been passed on to our engineers. I just don't know if and when that would be something that can be implemented. But yeah, it should be, there's conversation about whether or not that could be a way to kind of mitigate that for some. It's just a matter of just kind of, timing on one hand, and then how most people are going to be using the setup. I did see someone ask, I think it was last week while I was looking around in the Facebook group, someone asked, well, how would you start recording if you've got the gimbal, the camera mounted on a gimbal with an SSD recorded, because you lose control on the gimbal? And I think, honestly, this may sound a little rude, but have we all forgotten that you still can just press the record button, especially on a gimbal? Having everything integrated into the gimbal, yes, it's cool. And yes, it does slim things down, but that is not enough of a reason to not use new features, because red record button still works. You can still trigger recording that way. If you're using your mobile app, you could still trigger recording that way as well. So there's a couple different ways that you can still get in there and be able to work with it. Let's see here. Red Frame, does the S5 2X have timecode? I thought I noticed TC on the screen when you were explaining the firmware update. Oh, so this is just an S5 Mark II that I'm connected into. The S5 Mark II X and the S5 Mark II do have timecode. However, time code on these cameras is designed, let me put it into the video mode so I can actually go to that menu. Time code on the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II X are designed to be for sending time code out to a recorder. So you have a time code option. When you go into it, you can display time code, you can have rec run or free run, time code values, so you can manually input current time, manually reset it, manually input a number, time code mode, whether you're drop frame or not. But the kind of reason why time code is included on these cameras is for this part right here, HDMI time code output. That is so that when you have something like a Ninja 5 or Ninja 5 Plus, or say you're using a Blackmagic recorder, if you want it to be able to trigger the recording, you need some way to send that signal over HDMI to record, and that's done through time code. So that's why time code's there. The S5 Mark II X and the S5 Mark II do not have the ability to inject to jam sync time code like the S1H did. So that's just something that's not part of these particular cameras. Let's see here. Does PDAF find focusing in very low light apertures, f12 through f22, challenging? Diffraction, etc. I've seen several cases of focus vibrating at those apertures. So like all camera manufacturers, this is not a Lumix thing. This is a technology thing. Phase detect autofocusing, whether it's on sensor or it was back in the DSLR days where it was a separated, kind of sensor in the camera, when your aperture stops down really far, usually it's anywhere between like f16 is, I think, about where most companies are now. Phase detect does not work when you go down that low. It's the same thing as all of our competitors. This is not a unique thing to us. This is every single camera out there. All cameras in the mirrorless space, when you stop down, say you stop a camera down at f22, all of them revert to a contrast-based focusing system. The reason being is there's not enough light because your iris is closed so far to actually be able to tell the information. And there's other things, there's the diffraction, all that kind of stuff does play into this. It is a general issue across the board for all, again, and I can't stress this enough. This is all manufacturers. This is not us. So on the one hand, don't necessarily gang up on us with this. If you gang up on us, you should be ganging up on everybody else about it as well, because it isn't unique to us. This is everybody. But yeah, if you're shooting at f22 and you're stopped way down and you are underexposing, you are making it incredibly hard to focus with. If you look at the way specifications used to be on DSLRs, they would tell you what aperture the cross-type PDA phase detect system would work at. Back when I was selling cameras, I remember having to make that very clear for sports and wildlife photographers. So it's more of a challenge that phase detect as a whole and as a system has. The difference is that if you look at some videos, like I think Camera Conspiracies did a pretty cool test on it, where he took the S5 Mark II, and he takes other cameras too, puts them into, like, I think it was like a bathroom, and it's really dark, and as you start to drop the raise the ISO and then stop the lens down, you notice how we actually perform better in really, really low light scenarios where systems typically transition back to contrast, because of all of our work that we've done for years on contrast, despite those that really didn't like contrast detect. So yeah, that's just kind of the way technology works. If you look it up and you kind of read about how phase detect works, it needs light. It needs a ton of light to be accurate. Let's see here. It's from Dennis. I can't wait to check out External Raw. And other good news, I got no opinion on that whole thing. Just bought a new S1R plus lenses, trying to update the lens from 1.0 to 1.1, but firmware update is grayed out. Any idea why this is happening? Camera firmware updated. Richard, couple things you can check. One, it kind of just depends on which lens. Obviously, if it's one of our lenses, it should be working fine. The other thing that I have seen is it depends on Mac or Windows. whether or not you copied and pasted the firmware file for the lens onto the card, so it goes in the same place the camera firmware goes, and whether or not you eject the card properly. In some cases, the reason it's grayed out is because it doesn't see a firmware file there. That's usually the case. So basically, you'd probably, most likely, if you re-download the file, make sure it's the .plf file, put it on the card, eject the card from the computer, and then load it into the camera. You should be fine with it. I also highly recommend, just typically, and this is just a personal thing, I always only do firmware updates from the SD cards. I know that camera's got CF Express and XQD, but I just usually always do them from the SD cards. I think it's because I just have faster access to my SD card reader. So, what are your thoughts on, I don't comment on hypothetical cameras, and the truth, the only thing I will comment on that one is that 8K is, while it sounds cool, how many people do you actually see using 8K in the real world? Can you please talk about the difference in the two lenses? 12 to 35 millimeter lenses, Vario 12 to 35, Leica DG 12 to 35. The updated 12 to 35 Leica version has slightly different coatings, a little bit closer focus distance, and is just a modern refresh of the lens for cameras like the GH6. Lenses, a lot of times you'll see updates, and if they're very minor updates, it could be for a number of things. It could be to bring the system more into a cohesive view. Like in Micro Four Thirds, our top tier lenses in Micro Four Thirds are all the Leica series. Before we really did a lot of work with the Leica series lenses, it was the X series lenses, which was the 12 to 35, 35 to 100. That was when they had the kind of purplish look to them. And we updated them to the black versions of them, which, you know, updated motors and all that kind of stuff. And then now we're into the Leica certified Leica variants of the lenses. So minor little changes there, but it does have a slightly closer autofocus distance than the, or minimum focus distance than the blacked out version of the 12 to 35. Automant, or Atonement, I think. What is the best setting for audio on the GH6? I do live events with loud music. First and foremost, you'd want to make sure that you're recording as high of a bit rate as you can, or bit depth, because there's 16, 24, and then there's, we don't have it in the cameras, but there's 32-bit audio is another option down the line. If you are recording incredibly loud events, you have a couple of options. The XLR1 audio adapter is going to give you 96 kilohertz 24-bit, so you're going to get into 24-bit audio, which is going to give you a little bit more kind of leeway in protecting and making sure you're not clipping as much. Ultimately, make sure that you're, you know, with the levels on the camera, try to do everything you can to make sure that you don't clip. The other option is if you don't want to use an XLR1 or you want to record audio into the camera. I've been using these, the Go Wireless 2s from Rode for quite some time now. And actually, I had to use it during NAB because that was a very loud challenge there. Those allow me to record into the camera. So I get my 24-bit audio track on, say, like my GH6. But it also allows me to record into the actual lavalier, and then convert that to 32-bit when you export it out off on your Mac or PC. All of my recording that I did at NAB when I was walking around the show, I ended up having to do some voiceover for it, but while I was doing in the booth talking, having that 32-bit backup actually saved a lot of my recording capabilities, because 32-bit, think of it, it's closer to RAW, the way we think of RAW photos. So you have a lot more control to be able to, you know, actually be able to pull back your clipped information. Photo Joseph does a very good discussion on 32-bit float audio and what the importance of it is. and why it's such a cool thing to do, but it's also very misunderstood. So I would encourage you to take a look at Photo Joseph's conversation about 32-bit float. Let's see here. If you keep lithium at 100% always, it will harm the life of the battery. Yes, that's true. And yes, lithium batteries do need to drain for their health. That is incredibly true. But at the same time, part of the power consumption conversations that people have when it comes to cameras is how long it takes for the discharge to happen. That's why people are kind of going about that. So I see that you're talking. It's not a Lumix specific issue. Every lithium battery has that. Yes. Every lithium battery, you never want to leave them dead, and you never want to leave them fully charged all the time. You do need to cycle them over time, or you should cycle them over time. Let's see here. Can you talk a little bit about the burst rate and if it's good for sports on an S5 Mark II? Hello from Austin. Hello, Doug. Oh, I'm in Austin as well. So yeah, burst rate on the S5 Mark II. So S5 Mark II has a number of different burst rate options if you've been taking a look at the camera. And you can change them, if I can go into the right menu, you can change them in a couple of different ways. So when I come down into the camera menus here, so I'm in the, let's go to the actual right menu that I'm trying to show y'all. So if I'm in here, I hit display, you'll see that I'm in the photo mode. I'm in others, page 1, and then down under burst shooting settings, this is where I can change what burst mode 1 and burst mode 2 allow me to do. Burst mode 1 by default is set to high, which is going to be 7 frames per second with mechanical shutter when you're in continuous, and 9 frames when you're using AFS, so single. And then we have SH, which is 30 frames per second. So as far as burst shooting goes on the S5 Mark II and sports photography, it's going to depend a little bit on what your, I guess, type of sport is going to be. So I've done a lot of shooting with the S5 Mark II tracking motorcycles. So that's panning with the motorcycle through turns as they exit turns, things like that. And for that kind of shooting, it's been great. I haven't had any problems with it. Tracking focus wise, it's been spot on for everything that I'm doing with it. And as far as the burst rates go, 30 frames per second, it's great. I actually find myself going back to mechanical and only shooting 7 because there's different logics as to why. I will spare my opinion on burst rates, but both of them are going to work perfectly fine with it, especially now after the version 1.1 firmware update that we pushed on the camera. So that makes things actually a lot easier to work with on the camera now. So you have a good platform to work with for sports and that kind of thing. If you're photographing something that has where you're stationary and you're trying to photograph the subject crossing through the plane and you're not moving the camera with the subject, you definitely want to stick to, well, you don't have to, but you'd probably stick to mechanical burst rate for that if you're in continuous. The 30 frames per second still uses electronic shutter, and no electronic shutter camera is skew free. It just depends on the severity of the skew. Our camera does do correction to it while it's saving the images, but you can overcome that depending on how fast you're panning with the subject. But across the board, I have no problem taking the camera going out and shooting sports with it. Now, granted, I'm talking motorsports, not, baseball, basketball, football, stuff like that. That's just not where my category is, so I would leave that response up to those that do that. Looking from the back, the design of the S-Series cameras is a box with an EVF housing. G-Series cameras have more shape. Is it shape? Just looks or function? I love it anyway, the different styles. No, it's really just style. depending on how you've got the cameras and you know the design that you want to go with it, people seem to have really liked the S5 platform and the G9 as far as a camera design goes, and those do tend to be more angular. So yeah, that's usually why they have kind of a little bit more squared out look in the full frame line. Does the S5 Mark II X have time code? I did answer that. If you go back a little bit, red frame, I did address that one. Note that I film with autofocus lenses and manual anamorphic lenses too. Nordstrom, what did I see? The autofocus on the BGH1 is decent enough, but not on par with Hybrid AF. When will we have a BGH2 with Hybrid AF? Have Micro Four Thirds anamorphic kit and not planning to buy a full frame anamorphic kit. Honestly, not sure when a box camera update would happen. Right now we're focused on S5 Mark II, S5 Mark II X, that kind of stuff. But yeah, just kind of keep your ear to the ground. You know, as soon as we know or announce something, you know that we're going to talk about it. Let's see here. Where did we go again? Thank you, YouTube. Where did we go? SHGR1, DNXHR, G95. Where was it? Jeez. Okay. Lumix S5 Mark II with raw image files is 12 or 14-bit, and Lumix raw image file is compressed or uncompressed because I don't see the two options in the menu, so I don't know what format it is. The S5 Mark II and all of our full-frame cameras are 14-bit raw files, and I think they're compressed RAW files or uncompressed. I'm not 100% sure. But we are 14-bit RAW files, and we don't make the distinction to separate them between the bit depths for them. I see there's been a lens firmware update on the 70-200 2.8. Are there plans for a firmware update on the 70-200 f4 to improve focus while zooming? The 70-200 f4, which is the R70-200, I think it'll be getting an update. I just can't remember when. But yeah, I will. We will press that onto our team. See what the plan looks like. So here, Warren says, I'm looking for a 50mm to 110mm tilt shift lens for either the S5 or the G9 with adapter if needed. Any suggestions? Oof. I haven't honestly kept up on tilt shift lenses. I think there are a couple different companies making them. I think Laowa makes some tilt shift lenses, just not 100% sure. Let's see here. How to understand the discharger. Okay. You guys still going on about batteries. For some people, it might be reasonable to make an easy mode with just the absolute necessary options. This could reduce much of the hassle some people have. Maybe I missed part of the conversation there. Interesting, though. The G95 and G100 share the same sensor and processor. What about the G9? Does it use a newer sensor than both? Sensors within those cameras are different generations of each. Processors are different generations. So yeah, they're all different cameras across them. What about future camera support of DNX HD or HR? Probably not going to see that in a camera. That's an Avid format. If you do need something like that, you're going to end up having to go to an external recorder. I bet Netflix will remove S1H from its camera list and bump up the required specs. I don't know if you're just trying to be funny or if you're trying to prod and poke, but I doubt that's going to happen. Netflix specs are what they are. So, what camera are you using for the live stream? S5 Mark II. Is the SHGR1 tripod grip supported or going to be supported on the S5 Mark II or any other S cameras? Yeah, as long as you use that little the adapter that comes with it that converts it to the 2.5mm, it will work. Is Cinelike D and or Cinelike V more flexible than natural when it comes to white balance adjustments in post, in 8-bit as well? Yes and no. I would honestly leave that one better to Dennis to answer, who knows way more about color than I do and flexibility. And I do see that he did respond a little bit there, so he's probably got you with an answer there. So thank you, Dennis, for chiming in. Um, as a wedding videographer, it is helpful to be able to click the gimbal record and not on the top of the camera. It becomes a post nightmare. Those types of replies are what will hold you and your product back. Give the consumers what they ask for. Don't tell them what they think they need. Listen to their concerns and address them. If you've been following us for a long time, that is what we try to do. There are certain things that there may be technical limitations. So it's not necessarily saying that, what you should or shouldn't need. It's more trying to just at least provide for the time being a kind of reference to something you can do while something gets figured out. If I was misunderstood in the way I described the gimbal recording, I apologize, but at the same time, in the internet age, we tend to make one tiny little thing that takes a little bit of just understanding of your cameras. We turn those into hills to die on, it seems, these days. Pointing out that a camera is not useless if it doesn't have that built in at the moment for being able to trigger while using SSD recording. Because the difference is that if you're not going to be shooting all intra or ProRes, say, to an SSD, if you're just going to be doing long op, or if you're doing all intra, into the internal able bit rates, this isn't a problem for you. You're still able to use the USB to connect into a gimbal, and you're perfectly fine. It's a very specific group that would need the gimbal, control, USB SSD, and would need all of it to function at the same time. It is a relatively smaller group that it is something that is being looked at to see if there's a way to kind of get around and kind of still be able to give you all that control. So let's see here. Steven, thanks, Sean. Appreciate the clarification. Atomos Ninja 5 Plus is on my wish list. That may bump it up a little. Thanks for the stream. Awesome. Let's see here. Another consideration is heavily overcompressed image using real-time LUT instead of using the internal profiles. You also get much better dynamic range and color this way. Dennis, saw a test. The A7 III wasn't able to keep up. It was also about one stop darker at 12,800 and mushy. Something to remember, I think a lot of people also should look at too, is that ISO values between different camera companies. Some camera companies may be changing what they consider an ISO 3200. If you look at what measured values are versus what the cameras are set to, there may be some slight little differences between every camera company. But yeah, we tend to, it's just where your native points are can change. It can turn a shot at, say, 12,800 from being incredibly useful to being mushy and desaturated. Feature suggestion in photo mode. It would be nice to record audio MP3 only of the image. This way I can talk into the mic, briefly describe scenery or natural sound. Surprisingly, well, maybe not that surprisingly, that has been brought up before. Doing kind of audio notation on an image is something that has been asked. Don't know if and when it would come, but it has been brought up. What is the best setting for audio on the GH3? I think I answered that one before. Question about SSD recording update for S5 II. Will S5 II be able to record all video files? So S5 Mark II, I want to make this very clear. S5 Mark II, this one, will not get SSD recording. That is only on the S5 Mark II X. So if you are looking for SSD recording, you have to go to the X model. The base model from day one, we've been saying it since day one. The S5 Mark II will not support SSD recording. On a camera like the S5 Mark II X, however, or the GH6, and I'll use the GH6 as the example, SSD recording can be done for everything. Photo, video, all codecs, all flavors of ProRes, all intra, IPB, MOV, MP4, doesn't matter, because that is the storage solution that you would flip the system over to. Don't have definitives that I can tell you yet on the S5 Mark II X. Hopefully you'll be able to share more information about that soon. But yeah, just as a reminder, S5 Mark II, basic Mark II, will not support SSD file recording in that camera, even with the SFU upgrade that is only for RAW on the S5 Mark II. Let's see here. We can do better than this. I'm not 100% sure what you're referencing to is pointless. But okay, let's see. Anchor power supplies. Okay, I see what you're referencing now. Any kind of question about future product or what you'd like to see or what you're kind of thinking you see on some rumor site? Unfortunately, one, I can't comment on rumor sites like that, and two, just remember in the back of your head that rumor sites, anybody can make up a rumor. Even if they hate the brand, they can make up a rumor to try to get you all whipped up for no reason. D Creative Visions, what power bank would you recommend powering the S5 Mark II or S5s? Where is mine? Um, so I use one of these if I'm out in the field. This is an Anker Power Core. What was this? 2800? Something like that? 28,000? Um, this one has been really awesome. Powers the camera, lets you run. Just remember on the S5 Mark II, the base, like the original S5. Get this right. On the original S5, you will get the notice that pops up that says turn camera off for charging, which means that it's trickle charging the battery. It's not providing power and charge. The S5 Mark II, it will provide power and charge. S5 Mark II X, it will provide power and charge. So that means that you could just be running the camera off of the battery bank once the internal battery is fully charged. On the original S5, if you ran it for a long enough amount of time, you will slowly drain the internal battery. Let's see here. New S5 Mark II owner. What are your S5 II webcam settings to look so crisp, and are you using USB cord? Joshua, no. So I stream out over HDMI into an Elgato 4K capture card. Because I have, I need to be able to jump in and work into OBS and change into my switcher so I get my second camera angle, all that kind of stuff. So I do it the more traditional way. So it's HDMI out into a 4K capture card, and then I broadcast in 4K for these streams. So it allows me to be like really kind of, it just lets me get the highest possible quality out of it. Otherwise, if I was going to be using the USB functionality for it, you can use Lumix webcam drivers or Lumix Tether and do a window capture. Those do work, but you're going to be at about 720p resolution for that. It just depends on what your needs are for it. Harry, are there any further collaborations planned with other accessory manufacturers, like with Condor Blue? So I even if I did know, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But yeah, we are actually super proud of that collaboration and the work that Condor Blue did coming out with that handle. If you haven't seen it already, Condor Blue released at NAB a top grip, or just a grip for the cages that allows you to load these SanDisk SSD mags. So these are the SSDs that SanDisk has made under the professional branding. This one is a 1 terabyte. But they go all the way up to 4 terabyte in size. Our cameras can only read up to 2 terabyte. But they made a grip that allows you to slide this into the actual grip instead of having to like bolt a reader onto the side of the camera or do the old school way of getting like Samsung T5s and just bolting them on and then they're just there. So now you actually get a usable handle that can also act as the mag carrier. And then if you're not, or when you're done recording, you just can connect that USB right into a computer and the handle will actually function as a reader as well. So definitely go take a look at that. I talk about it in last week's broadcast from NAB. It is a super cool accessory to go for, and it's really not that expensive. I think it's like $199 for the grip. The mags are about $150 to $170, I think, online, and you get the transport reader with it. For the 1 terabyte, and I think it's like $250 or $260 for the 2 terabyte one. So they're the same going price basically as what you'd get for a typical M.2 NVMe SSD drive. But you get the housing and a connector that's actually meant to be connected and unconnected a lot. The reason why you don't have just a regular NVMe bare drive being done is because those connectors are not meant to be plugged in and unplugged over and over and over again. Let's see here. Where did we go? Further collaborations. Any plans to add the ability to use 2 different frame markers simultaneously when using OpenGate? We have brought that up. I don't know if and when it would be something that could be implemented, but it is something that we have talked about actually at length internally. Knowing that OpenGate has become pretty widely accepted now as a solid way to actually be able to do one shot, get your 16:9 deliverable, and as you point out, be able to do 9:16 as well, despite I know a lot of people hate 9:16, but if clients are asking for it, it's still money. Being able to shoot it once and have both overlaid would be an incredible deployment on a camera. Yeah, other than that, it is being discussed, and I think it is being looked into as to what could be done. But yeah, we'll kind of go on there. We can be better than this. All right, I see what your question was there. If you ask me, you can't ask any questions. I've been answering everyone's questions through the entire stream. As far as future updates on cameras, that is stuff that we don't have any information that I can tell you. Know that we are committed to the Micro Four Thirds platform. We're committed to the GH6 platform. Aside from that, there's not anything I can tell you at the moment. I know it may not be what you'd really like to know, but yeah. Where do we go here? Which software can read MOV files? Is DaVinci Resolve Studio a good workaround or more powerful computer needed? There's a couple different programs out there. I mean, I'm a Premiere Pro user most of the time. So I mean, Premiere Pro reads MOV files without a problem. I know with Resolve, it depends on the resolution that you go to. So like you don't want to go all the way up to, over 3840 by 2160 if you're in the free version, because my understanding is it doesn't work. But even if you're just looking to view files, depending on the resolution and your computer spec, you should be able to just kind of play them and they should work. VLC works fine for me as long as I'm not doing like as long as I'm not doing like the ultra high resolution, so like was it 5.8K or any of those kinds of resolutions. My graphics card doesn't have that resolution encoding capability, so it gets really choppy. But 3840, 4096, those work perfectly fine. And I'm using a 30. What am I on? 3080 Ti from EVGA. I am a PC user, by the way. Let's see here. Condor Blue released a capture card, HDMI to USB-C. Will this device enable the S5 Mark II to stream via smartphone and an appropriate app? Could you check that at NAB? HDMI to USB-C, I mean, I don't think it would work the way you would expect it to work, because that would allow you to go into a computer, not into, like, from the camera. The camera's not going to send that feed out. If you were able to get the video feed out from the camera, so like HDMI out of the camera into USB-C and then into something like your mobile device, I know USB-C and Android devices do have the capability to have a capture card basically plugged into it. But that stuff depends on the software you'd want to use. There'd have to be an app written to be able to take the, I forget what protocol it's called, but it would have to be able to take that video feed in and then encode it as if it was a camera. It's been possible, but I don't know of anyone that's done it because it's kind of overly complicated and you need some shady software that you kind of find online in different places to read it, because no one's actually built anything off it. And that would all be done on the mobile device, but it's technically possible, especially if someone knows how to write code and write an app. All right, I got time for one more question here before I have to call it today. Is it possible, maybe via firmware, to show zebras while adjusting the ISO value? It just came to mind, and the fact that they don't show has always bugged me a bit. I can ask. I believe we've been looking into that one. Because I know originally like waveform wouldn't be up when you would do ISO values. I have to check on zebras what the difference is. I can't promise that it would come to the camera. But what I can promise is that I will bring it up and I'll talk to our team and see if it is something that they might be able to do. All right, I got one more here. Question regarding recording ProRes on GH6 using CF Express Type B cards compared to external SSD. Is there any difference in image quality, or are they... I'm not even going to try to pronounce that because I went to an American education school, public school, so... Okay. Image quality difference? No, there is absolutely no difference. It's ProRes, whether it's on the CF Express card or it's on an SSD. What you may notice is that if you are recording to an external SSD, the camera will actually run cooler because CF Express cards get very hot. So if you're working in a really, really hot environment, it may actually be advantageous to record to an SSD. Not that the camera has any problems with thermals. I mean, we rate them to run up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. However, if you're able to do anything you can to keep heat out of a camera and away from the internal components, that is always better. So if you did want to use the SSD recording for that, your CF Express card wouldn't be what's actually writing, so that card won't be getting hot inside the camera. And if you've ever done a long recording, take the CF Express card out relatively quickly but carefully, and you'll feel how hot those cards get. So that's really the only difference between the two, is where does the heat end up getting generated. The heat's either going to get generated out on an SSD or on a CF Express card in the camera. And if you can do it outside, that could be a much better solution for you. Cool. All right. So with that, we are going to call it for today, because I do have to unfortunately jump to some other meetings today. But thank you all so much for tuning in. And I appreciate the comments at the end. Are you running for office? Be a good podcaster, make a good press secretary. Thank you. My ego needed a boost, I guess. Yeah, so we will be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'm still working out on the details of the streams. We're getting back now that we're back after NAB. I can actually kind of go back into my longer term planning for streams and who's going to be on them. We're working on trying to get some of our international guests and photographers and creators to come in, join us with this. So keep an eye out for that. Any other programming notes? Yeah, keep your ears to the ground on the Lumix social channels, on Lumix Live, on basically anywhere that we talk to you as the company, and where you can reach out to us. You'll want to be tuned in so that when we do make announcements on things like the S5 Mark II X, or I'm pointing at my S5 Mark II, but an S5 Mark II X. Or firmware updates or any of that kind of stuff, you'll be first to know about them. If you liked the conversation, if you want to have me do more of these specific, I know we tried for a little while to do each month, do one long just AMA. Definitely let me know. Hit the like button, helps me justify this channel and grow it and get more viewership. If you haven't already, subscribe if you think that we've earned a subscription for you. And if you know someone who would get a bit of information out of the conversation we had today, share the video to them, because that all helps us actually just kind of grow this channel and, yeah, just gets more people into it. Other than that, thank you again, everybody. I hope you have an awesome rest of your weekend. And, yeah, we'll be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time live. Take care.